Hi, this is Julia, and we are back in Cuba. Last time, we talked about Fidel Castro and the beginning of one of the most legendary revolutions in the history of the 20th century. My viewers may recall that the most important mission of this channel is to dissect and analyze revolutions, to understand what makes them progressive or otherwise. And while the historical context of this narrative is very important, reciting the chain of events is not my primary goal. Before we resume our Cuban adventure, I'd like to pause for a bit and talk about the reasons why this somewhat improbable revolution succeeded with such great ease. In my view, there are 4 key reasons for that. One of the most important reasons for the revolution's success was the fact that Batista's dictatorship had become intolerable. Many Cubans who joined the opposition groups did not do so out of their political convictions or their dislike for Batista, but out of desperation as the country was descending into chaos. Slogans such as "anything but Batista" captured this mood rather well. Secondly, Batista's elite lacked the will to fight and gave up too easily. Even with all the army defections, Batista possessed a much greater military power against the disjointed opposition forces led by Castro. But military victories are much more complex than just the number of opposing forces. The simple truth is that Cubans had reached the tipping point of tolerating Batista's brutal dictatorship, and the regime knew it. Batista and his cronies conducted a very reasonable risk-reward analysis. They had already stolen so much from the populace that it was difficult to imagine that they could get away with more. And even if they were to crush the uprising, the country was on fire, and Batista would have been fighting one uprising after another. And clearly, the normalization of the situation in Cuba was not part of Batista's agenda. He knew that he needed to have a safe getaway and decided to cut his losses and preserve his life as well as the stolen funds. Talk about excessive luxuries. This is Batista's gold-plated phone. This brings me to my next point. Batista lost his will to fight when his internal policy alienated his biggest ally and guarantor, the United States. Without the US, Batista had no chance of staying in power for long. And he knew it. The only thing that could help him was a divide and conquer approach. And this brings me to the most important reason, Fidel himself. As we've seen throughout history, a single leader with a clear, simple message often rises to the top. While I do believe that Batista's government would have collapsed even without Fidel, this power vacuum would have been filled by a wide range of opposition forces. These revolutionary movements would have been so different from one another that it is almost certain that post-Bolivarian infighting scenarios would have occurred in Cuba, leading to years of civil conflict. Yet, that did not happen. I don't think it was because of Fidel's brilliant leadership. In fact, as a military commander, Fidel by that point was undistinguished at best. But as I highlighted in my previous episode, he was an absolute master of PR. He created a legendary image that all opposition groups could unite around, and they needed to unite to win. After that, Fidel had just a little time to legitimize the creation of himself as a fearless leader, and to rebuild the power structure in a way that he could rely on it for years to come. As Fidel and his army were marching from Santiago de Cuba to Havana in December 1958, I firmly believe that Castro had no economic program or understanding of the impact of his massive redistribution aspirations. Just about the only legislation he wanted to implement immediately was the land reform. All else was just a mirage, a dream of social equality and economic prosperity with no understanding of how to achieve this dream. But what a wonderful dream it was. And after waking up from decades of corruption, economic inequality, and political instability, Cubans of all walks of life wanted to believe in that dream, and in the man who rejected it so passionately. One thing is obvious. Fidel was extremely charismatic. He also understood people very well and knew what they wanted to hear. He was a phenomenal actor, and he was drinking his own Kool-Aid. Oh yeah! The more he drank, the more convincing he became, rousing people to great deeds. These 4 key reasons laid the groundwork for a relatively easy transition of power. But was Castro really the master of his own domain? Despite his fear that the revolution would turn into bloodshed, he had to balance between the different political forces, many of which wanted revenge. Thus, despite the relatively bloodless start of the revolution, score settling soon began to undermine Fidel's utopia. And this is a topic of our next episode. Please subscribe, push that button, yeah, that one, and like this video, and comment excessively. Take care, and thank you so much for watching Rebels and Revolutions.